I remember years ago meeting a woman who nearly every time she'd speak in a group would finish her sentence by saying, "But I'm not as smart as y'all, so." It was remarkable how often she would say this, "But I'm not as smart as y'all, so." And here's why I say that was remarkable. Because the woman was very smart. She was sharp, insightful, eloquent. These things were obvious to all the world. Obvious to everyone, that is, except to herself. It was both heartbreaking and painful to watch. Because the more I got to know this woman and the more I talked with her one-on-one, the more obvious it became that she was not being falsely modest or intentionally self-deprecating. She was instead convinced that she just wasn't very smart. She believed that. And I bring her up this morning because I want you to remember her as we go along with this sermon. For now, though, I want us to turn to one of the most colorful stories in the entire New Testament. Or perhaps colorful might not be the right word for it. Perhaps we should say one of the most horrifying stories in the entire New Testament. And I'm speaking, of course, of our gospel lesson for today, of Mark's narration of Jesus' encounter with the demon-possessed man in the land of the Gerasenes, the man usually referred to in biblical studies as the Gerasene demoniac. Now, this man is, according to Mark, known to his community as, quote, a man of the tombs, whatever that means. He's wild and he's crazy, and everyone in the town is freaked out by him. Well, when the story picks up in Mark chapter 5, this man of the tombs approaches Jesus and engages him in conversation. And Jesus, beholding this rabid man, asks him a very incisive question. A question that if we read this passage at merely the surface level, we might easily read right past. What is your name? Jesus asks him. Looking him right in the eyes, he says, "What is your name?" In the second chapter of Genesis, we learn something as human beings very significant about our human nature. For here in Genesis 2, we see that God has given the human being the capacity to name all other living creatures. Whatever the man named every living creature, the text says, that was its name. It's an extraordinarily important passage about the capacity of human nature, that we as human beings have been given authority by God to name one another. Leading us back to Jesus' question to and of the Gerasene demoniac. What is your name? He asks this ostensibly crazed man. What is your name? To which the man replies, "My name is Legion, for we are many." My name is Legion. That's my name. Now from here, Jesus, of course, goes on to heal the man, and when the man is delivered back to a state of wholeness, all of the town is awestruck and amazed. And it's a remarkable story in and of itself, to say nothing about the herd of swine that run off. It's a really, really, really remarkable passage. But what I want us to note today is that while the story on its surface describes a healing or an exorcism, at its deeper level, it describes a renaming. Which is to say, it describes a moment wherein, just like in the Genesis story, one human being exercises the altogether divine power of giving a name to another. You see, this man's name was not really Legion. That's not who he really was. This was not who he, as a created and thereby beloved child of God, was in his truest created essence. But nonetheless, this was who the man now believed himself to be. This was not his name, but it was the name that he had been assigned by others, and therefore it was the identity that he had come to live his life in light of, the identity that he now lived his life into. I am Legion, he said. And though really a beloved child of God and not a legion of demons, he believed that he was this legion. And the name that he assumed therefore informed and governed everything that he said and did. Leading me back now to the woman I told you about at the beginning of this sermon. But I'm not smart like y'all, so over and over and over. But I'm not smart like y'all, so. This was not true, yet she believed it about herself wholeheartedly. And why did she believe it? Because, turns out, when she was young, her older sister, whom she looked up to and whom she thought was brilliant, this older sister told her repeatedly when she was young that she was stupid. And so in this way, her older sister named her. And thus, having been named in this way, this woman, as a young girl, believed her sister, and therefore, for the next 4 decades, she went through her life living into that identity. Obviously smart, obviously educated, obviously eloquent. Nevertheless, in her own mind, she was, in her words, stupid. And this name, stupid, robbed her day in and day out of realizing the fullness of her God-given identity, and I'd imagine that it still does. And I bring all of this up this morning as we prayerfully consider this colorful and altogether horrifying story of Jesus and the Gerasene demoniac. I bring this all up this morning so as to ask us this question: what names have we been given? Who in our lives has exercised the divine power of naming us? And to what degree have these people used this power as God intends for it to be used? That is, in the way that Adam and Jesus used it, making us see ourselves as the beloved creatures whom we are. To what degree have they used this divine power in that way? And to what degree have they used this power so as to blind us to our truest nature? How many of us have been told that we're in some way unworthy, unlovable, incorrigible, somehow lacking Or how many of us have been told that we're defined by something that on its face seems positive, but that soon enough becomes its own kind of identity trap? In other words, who among us has been told that they were the smart one, the pretty one, the strong one, the athletic one, and on and on and on? How many of us have heard one of these names assigned to us and then in hearing it assumed it as not only true but as altogether totalizing? As if we are therefore reducible to this name, as if this is the one thing that makes us worthy, and have therefore lived our lives in light of that one name, limited by it and circumscribed by it. How many of us have been burdened in this way by a name soon enough becoming our full identity and thereby preventing us from knowing our true name? The name spoken over us in the beginning and the one that is still spoken over us every day of our lives, if only we'll have ears to hear. The name that says, "You are my child, whom I love, in whom I am well pleased." The name spoken of us as spoken in the beginning that says, "You, my child, are very good." How many of us struggle to hear these, our truest names, because we have been named otherwise by those entrusted with the power to name us? All across the Scripture, we see the importance of this naming and renaming capacity. Abram becomes Abraham. Simon becomes Peter. Saul becomes Paul, and on and on. And all of these renamings are versions of the same thing happening, albeit less colorfully, as that which happens in Mark chapter 5 with the Gerasene demoniac. This is not who you really are, God is effectively saying in all of these instances. I know, God is saying, who you really are. This is your name. There's a scene at the end of Disney's Moana that makes me choke up each time I see it. Throughout the story, Moana, the young girl, has been trying to return the stolen heart of the goddess Te Fiti. And when finally Moana reaches the end of her journey, she has to somehow get past this evil being Taka so as to get to Te Fiti. And what Moana eventually realizes is that Taka is in fact Te Fiti. That Taka is the broken, empty version of Te Fiti, the being that Te Fiti has been reduced to, has been turned into because she no longer has her heart. And so in the movie's climax, this young Moana begins to approach this crazed, evil, demonic-like being Taka, and holding up the jewel that is her stolen heart, Moana begins to sing, "I know your name. They have stolen the heart from inside you. But this does not define you. This is not who you are. I know who you are." And these words pierce through Taka's vicious spirit, and in accepting the heart, in hearing someone remind her of who she really is, and having someone rename her. Suddenly, Tafiti begins to take on life and color again. And all around her, color and life and vegetation begin to spring forth once more from the earth. All because a young girl exercised the remarkable capacity to, in effect, hold a mirror up to her and say, "This is not who you are. I know who you are. This is not your name. This is your name." Dear family, the point and the power of the Genesis story is not that in the beginning one human being was given authority to name another. Instead, the power and the point of the Genesis story is that as human beings, we have all been given authority to name one another. And we can use this remarkable aspect of our created nature, this aspect of our nature that is stamped with the very image of Creator God. We can use this aspect of our nature either to name one another in a way that enables folks to more clearly see themselves as the beloved children of God that they really are, or we can use this aspect of our nature to diminish one another and to blind one another to who we really are. One or the other. Looking back, what I wish I had done in response all those years ago to that woman incessantly saying, "But I'm not smart like y'all, so." What I wish I'd done was simply ask her, "What is your name?" And then gone on to say to her, "Because this is not your name. I know your name." I didn't do that, but I wish I did. I wish I'd been reading Mark chapter 5 around that time. Wish I'd been a little more aware at that time of the awesome power that we've been given as human beings. But alas, at that time in my life, I wasn't sufficiently aware of such things. But I am now. And so the point of this sermon then is my way of offering to you what I should have offered to her then. And I offer it as a reminder for each of us concerning our truest identity as children of God. And I likewise offer it as a reminder that we are all called to exercise this power for the benefit of others too. Despite what anyone has ever told you, you are God's child, God's beloved, in whom God is well pleased. You are very good. That is your name. Now go forth and live in light of it. And go forth and remind others that this is their name too. And all God's people said,